Welcome back to the Free Code Camp podcast. I'm Quincy Larson, teacher and founder of freeCodeCamp.org. Each week, we're bringing you insight from developers, founders, and ambitious people getting into tech. This week, we're joined by John Smilga. He's a software engineer and prolific instructor who's published more than a dozen full-length courses on the Free Code Camp YouTube channel and on his own YouTube channel over the past few years. John, welcome to the Free Code Camp podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm stoked to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, and thanks for, you were telling me before the show started that you've listened to a lot of the episodes. I feel honored and flattered to know that you're among the Free Code Camp podcast audience.
I mean, it starts with people who you invite, and then the base just does, does the rest. I mean, you have super accomplished, interesting people, and then you always make it special. Just like Free Code Camp, just like everything you guys do, there's something like unique, and that just sets it apart. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I love playing the bass, and I was telling you earlier, you're like, where's the bass? And I was like, oh, I don't want to have to record 10 times right in front of you, like when I screw up like my bass lines. So I just kind of record them separately. But yeah, let's go all the way back. Like I always like to start like the origin story. Who is John Smilga? How did he come about? So you were living in Latvia in the 1980s. Of course, people who aren't as familiar with geography, that's like over in kind of like the eastern part of Europe. Like there, I think there's Lithuania, then Latvia, then Estonia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right? And they're
three
all
Baltic states. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're all pressed up against Russia, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're tiny. Just to give like kind of context, especially for people in the United States. So essentially, you got West Virginia. So we're the size of West Virginia, and then as far as population, we are like Nebraska. So yeah, just to give context, I'm not sure which other country in the world we can compare it to, but yeah, it's pretty tiny. We are like small. But yeah, it's awesome. It's an awesome place.
Yeah, maybe you could talk about what it was like being a kid over there, because like this was before the Berlin Wall fell.
Yeah,
you were born in, I think you mentioned 1982, so like just a couple years after I was born. I was born in 1980. What was your early childhood like?
So it was pretty typical for that time. Like both my parents were like working. They were like called like middle class at that point. My father was an engineer. My mom also worked in that field. And essentially we were a big family. We were like 5 kids. So it was the case where essentially grandma, for the most part, like raised us. Like she just did everything, starting with the cooking, cleaning, taking to the school back and all that. But as far as like the early memories, I don't remember like, let's say, per se like a lot of things as much. I do remember essentially when we gained the freedom that day. I do remember watching it on TV and stuff. But like I think most vividly, as far as just the difference between like, for example, as I was growing up and my kids, I do see that, like for example, for us when we were growing up, I wouldn't say that we were poor. It's just there were no things in the store. Like essentially there's nothing in the store. So I do remember vividly how I first time, like for example, I got the ham. Like mom literally brought back the ham. Right? And now I'm seeing at my kids, like who essentially can eat in breakfast, I'm just going to pick from one of these 5 like cereals and whatever. Yeah. And I'm not saying this as if like, oh, you should have, like, I'm just like giving you like the perspective. It is always like this thing in my mind. I'm like, wow, like how far like we have come and everything. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I mean, I do remember just like playing a lot outside and stuff and those type of things. But yeah, there was definitely scarcity of things just because, again, not because of like any kind of it's just there was no no things in the store and stuff like that. So
yeah,
like your choices were super limited. You had like one pair of boots that you can have and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think like back in the day, like I'm not a historian, so if I misspeak on matters of history, please let me know. But I remember like one of the things that like the U.S. like used as kind of like a propaganda point. Like I think they would like show on like Soviet TV like, what's the grocery store like in the United States? And it was just like tons of different varieties and stuff like that. And because in the Soviet Union, they had a lot of price controls in place, and they had kind of centralized planning, and just not as much stuff got made and distributed. Even if you had the money to buy things, there weren't things to necessarily buy. And I remember that being like really interesting, kind of, and I'm really grateful. Obviously, the situation changed, and Latvia is now a much nicer place, I would imagine. But maybe we could talk about the situation, like, I want to preface this before we get into anything. This is not a politics podcast. This is not a current events podcast. We are merely like talking about like history and kind of reflecting on it from our own personal perspective and stuff like that. You don't have to. You're not going to hear any fiery diatribes from me about like communism is bad or anything like that. Rather, I'm just trying to like kind of put some color on the time that you spent over there before you came to the U.S.
No, it's not like the stuff and everything, but there is something about the fact that you can make your own decisions instead of all the time being told, what you need to think, what you need to like, what is good, what is bad, and that sort of thing. And I mean, as far as Latvia, it's definitely especially as I was growing up, it was a painful process of moving from one system to another one. It's not like, yes, you get your freedom in one day, but you need to understand that like there's a difference. When I come to the United States, I see people who have been free their entire life. They know like what is actually freedom of speech, that they can say stuff. It doesn't happen overnight. Yes, you do, like you have like essentially the structure in place, but it takes a long time for the system to change, right? It can be the most basic thing, like the way I always look at like whether the how the country has developed, like what is the service industry, right? Every year, like as I'm going back to Latvia, I see that every time it changes. It started with basically when you come in and you need to apologize the fact that you entered the store, to the point of like now like it's growing and it's developing, and it just takes a long time. But it's the more I live, I do see the kind of this point of like that the free markets at the end of the day, like they're not ideal situation. Like again, we can get into tons of stuff, especially like the healthcares and all that, but I just don't see just few people in the government running everything and that being successful. I haven't like seen that. So
yeah. Well, what was school like? You went to high school. Did you go to university in Latvia as well?
So like in school, like it was one of those things. This is just a side note, but I went to the musically inclined school because my sister was going, my older one, and my mom thought that it's a good decision to send me there as well. So, but unlike my sister, I couldn't stand it. So I had to sing in a choir. Like you had like, I believe like every day we had like music class. You had to play an instrument, and I just didn't like it. And I have to say, like in high school, I was horrible in the sense that I was just lazy. I wasn't doing homework. I was not technically inclined. I'm not like, if someone asked me what I was doing, I don't even remember, but I know that I was like pretty bad at school. So I wasn't really interested. And at some point, like towards the last year, I just kind of decided, hey, listen, I'm going to go somewhere else. And in a sense, like I could have stayed in Latvia. There was no issues and whatsoever. It's like, it wasn't like I had to leave, but I just had this idea in my head. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go somewhere in Europe or United States. Just, I just want to see the world essentially, right? Because it was one of those things where half of my class were going for a law degree and half of my class were going for economics. So at that point, it was those like two popular choices. I believe I just read that right now it's the social communications is the thing. Like, so essentially once the class graduates, everybody goes into social communications and things like that. So, and I was like, listen, I don't want to do either of them. And so it was the case where I think I stayed for 1 or 2 years. And I believe back then we still had, we needed to go to army. So it was like, so I had to be in school. So I remember, I believe I went to like some very like strange degree for like 1 day. Essentially, I showed up the first day. Then I got the full year off and everything. And then I did the same the next year.
What were you doing during this period? Like, did you serve in the Latvian army or?
No. So it was one of those things where I was like super bad in school. Again, I cannot explain why, but like one of the benefits for me was that my father is like, and my mom of course as well, but my dad is like very, like he's big on working. So essentially my entire life I had this example of like how you're supposed to treat work. So essentially, if you're doing something, you're doing it. If you're not, okay, just pick something else. But if you commit to something, it's like for him, like 40 hours, when he hears 40 hours, he usually laughs. Like for him, it's kind of like, again, we can get into different topic where essentially I think that family is super important. So and that kind of helped me because when I went to England right after that for 2 years, I worked in a hotel and I was a bartender there. So that was kind of, it really helped me what I did in Latvia to kind of transfer that to
Interesting.
To
So
England.
you kind of got like into managerial and like hospitality management kind of.
Yeah, because like, I mean, we had to experience this whole thing. So I would say that I entered the workforce pretty quickly. And the reason why I attended those few classes here and there is simply to, back then, like, this is one of the decisions that I do regret. But then I was basically avoiding military because now I'm looking at it differently. But back then, it just
back then,
struck me.
Yeah. So you said you spent a year in England. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
How were you able to get over to England? Like, was it?
They just opened essentially in 2004. Latvia entered the European Union, so there were specific countries which were you could go.
So this
and
was
work
before Brexit, obviously. So you could just freely like go work in other European countries.
You can go and work, and you were. I mean, again, it's one of those things where a lot of times where I have a little bit of pushback where people say like that, essentially what I always say is to people like there was never a work in England or anywhere else that I would have had if let's say someone who was born there was willing to do it. So essentially it's one of those things where I understand that some people sometimes are not happy about immigration. I clearly understand that there needs to be controlled like how it happens, but at the same time, again, all the jobs that I was doing, essentially, if somebody like who's speaking English and whatever, he would have taken that job effectively immediately. I would have, been fired and all that. So it was an awesome experience. Yeah, you started off. It was a little bit rough in England in that hotel simply because like it was like the living quarters as well in the same place. So imagine like 3-4 people like living in that kind of a dorm room, right? But it's for like adults and everything else. So it was interesting in the beginning, but it helped me really to learn English. This is where I noticed that you can practice the language all you want. I believe in Latvia, I was already, since I knew that I'm going to be leaving to West, I was taking like I hired private teacher and I was like spending my own money to learn language and all that. But then once you go to England, I realized that I actually don't know that much. And the only way how to learn that is just to engage. And I've kind of taken this approach with pretty much everything after that, right? Whether that's music, jujitsu, I don't know, shooting basketball, learning code. I mean, you can learn theory, you can read about it, watch the videos all day long. There's nothing like the moment you touch the keyboard, that's the real learning. It's like it's just far superior to whatever you can read before that, or once you step on a jiu-jitsu mat, like again, you can watch
Things get very real very quickly, I would imagine.
Very quickly, you understand like what does that mean, and that's why I always like try to kind of combine like learning something, but then you always need to have a practice. For example, like speaking with my kids, I'm like a lot of times I'm like I understand that there's a need to learn like some third language, but at the same time, if you're not going to use it. Everyone I've talked to who have like been studying language, let's say, in school or whatever, but they haven't used it, by that time it's no real use. So that's.
Yeah. Well, like I'm excited to get into, kids and how you're teaching a lot of these things that you learned firsthand from your time, for example, in England. But just keeping with the chronology of events. So you've learned English reasonably well, probably not nearly as well as you speak now. You basically sound like a native speaker. You just have a little bit of an accent. But like, what happened from there? Like you said, it was kind of rough working this job that, so many jobs that are worked by immigrants in the United States, for example, are the kind of thankless jobs that most native-born Americans would not be willing to do. Strawberry farming is backbreaking work. And we have a huge influx of immigrants from other countries, some legal, some illegal, who do the strawberry picking and basically make the strawberry, that you get at the grocery store economically viable and make it not cost like $10 instead it costs like $3 or something. I haven't bought strawberries in a while, so I apologize if I'm like way off. But yeah, like that is, they had this campaign like take our jobs, and they basically said like any American who wants a job picking strawberries can come out here and we'll give you the same wages that we give the immigrants from Latin America, and very few people took them up on that, and almost everybody who took them up on it like ultimately like ditched the job because it's backbreaking work. And if you look at like the U.S. population, sorry, I said I wasn't going to talk about politics or current events, but immigration is near and dear to my heart. I care a great deal about America, and I care about its future, and its future is with immigrants. Our population would be declining like Japan, like Korea, like most European countries if it weren't thanks to new immigrants coming and starting families here like you and your wife have. My wife is a naturalized U.S. citizen, which I know I mentioned like practically every episode, but like we met in grad school. She moved to the U.S. She worked in tech for many years as an accountant and doing other things. And, she has been a productive member of the United States of America and paid taxes and everything like that. And this is like the way forward. Like people who think that we can continue to grow without immigration are dreaming, because as countries become prosperous, they generally slow down and have fewer kids. I've got 2 kids. You've got 2 kids. I don't know. You're probably not planning on having 5 kids like your parents, right?
No.
Neither am I.
I had this naive dream when I was like, I don't know, 20 or something. I thought, oh yeah, we were 5. So that,
Yeah.
reality hit me quickly.
I do know people who do that, but they don't get a lot of sleep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Power to you if you want to have 5 kids. I had 2, and then I had the surgery so that I can't accidentally have more. And I do not regret having the surgery any day.
I did that surgery, I believe, it was scheduled right away after my second born, and I did, I think, a month after that or something like that. Yeah. But,
So anyway, I just wanted to like get that out there. Like, I'm not going to come out in favor of like different policies or anything like that, but I will say that I fundamentally believe that having skilled immigrants coming to our country is a profoundly positive thing for everybody, for the immigrants, for the native-born Americans, for everybody. So, so you're kind of preaching to the choir when you say that. Sorry.
Yeah, no. But it was because, like, when I was there, I wouldn't say there was, like, I wouldn't say that anyone was mean to you or anything like that. But again, the reality of, like, working somewhere there, it's not just, sunshines and rainbows. That's the work you do. You go over there, and again, if anyone would show up and take that job, then that wouldn't be the case even, there's a reason why that company is doing it. There's a reason why you're doing it. And there's a reason why people who consume that, whatever, product are essentially buying it, because it's cheaper, essentially, at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
If we really kind of narrow it down to kind of the basics and all that. Yeah, and so I spent 2 years there. I was essentially, it was one of those interesting things where it's kind of an island in between the England and the France. It's called Guernsey. It's super interesting. It's actually one of the only places which were captured by the German. And essentially, England, smartly refused
during World War II.
Yeah, they refused to essentially go back and kind of fight for it, because they realized that they're just going to be slaughtered over there, because it's an island in the middle of the sea in between, and they were like, okay, you know what, we still need to defend the England. And the locals, they don't even call themselves that they're like English. They say that I'm from Guernsey, and they say that essentially that they have never forgotten that the fact that happened. But I think it's one of those things where I think it's essentially, like everything closes at like 7 p.m. and stuff like that, and it's just like, I'm like 20 something years old. I do want to like go and see something.
Yeah, so, not like the greatest place to like spend your 20s, I would imagine.
No.
Yeah, total population 60,000 people, which is not small.
Yeah, it's pretty decent. But the funny thing is that they have a bunch of like again the same thing like you just mentioned, farms where they grow, I believe, roses and vegetables and all that. And that job was even I would say even like essentially you needed to work longer hours and that sort of thing than let's say the hotel where I was working. And there was a lot of Latvians employed. So from the 60,000, there's like 5,000
Yeah.
Latvians at the time when I was there. So it was interesting where you go.
It is interesting. So, like, is the Latvian overseas diaspora, or like, have they specialized in kind of like that services sector type thing? Like, because I have lots of friends from India that live in like UAE or live in Bahrain or places like that, and it's like a whole lot of Indian engineers and people like that work in these countries, or the Philippines, for example. A huge percentage of the world's sailors are from the Philippines, and it's just kind of like they specialized.
And nurses. Yeah.
Yeah.
My wife was like, when she was working as a nurse, there was like tons of nurses from the Philippines because they have very good programs. And essentially that's one of the things how they, I mean, I don't want to sound like mean, but kind of their export is the fact that people go and work abroad and they send the money back.
Yeah. You know, remittances. Huge portion of their GDP is from workers abroad sending money back. Same thing with like India. It was definitely like that with China for a long time. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, though, like you said, there were 5,000 Latvians on this island
at that time.
Yeah. So was it challenging to actually speak English all the time when you had so many other people that were probably like wanting to talk to their countrymen? Did you have like Latvian, restaurants and stuff like that?
As far as the restaurants at that time, no. But there was like, as far as communication, between yourself, you were always talking Latvian. So it was one of those things where essentially you needed to immerse yourself. You needed to find the ways how you can just talk to English people. For me, it was pretty easy because I was working in a bar. So everyone who was coming there was speaking English. So essentially I was just like, being annoying and trying to come up with any kind of topic, talking about sports all day and stuff like that, just to get like basically the practice in. And as far as your question about what type of work, it was one of those things where back then, and it's still the case right now in Latvia, where essentially like the capital is doing really well. That's where I'm from, Riga. But then everything else is like, I mean, again, better or worse, but a lot of people like move from the outskirts, from smaller like places, and for them, it's mostly initially at least they're going for hospitality jobs and stuff, like essentially what you can do without any kind of like specialized education. Now with the years, since they have spent a lot of time, especially like for example in Ireland, I think we even have a bigger diaspora than the England. They, open up their own companies. They do different. They, go to school, study something. That's pretty common actually. But initially, that's one of those things where I don't know many instances where someone, let's say, like migrated and they right away started working for some giant company. It's definitely the case, of course, but I personally don't know them. You always start from some kind of job that you can actually perform and where there's a need. And such skilled jobs are way more protected. So you need to showcase way more qualifications and essentially networking and all that.
Yeah. So you came to the U.S. When did you move to the U.S.? Was that directly from Guernsey or?
Yeah. It was pretty much, I kind of decided that, listen, it's kind of like I saved up some money. I was working there at 2 jobs eventually, and I was able to save up some money, which was for 20-year-old was like, I thought that it's a big success. Yeah. And effectively, I just basically I thought, what, I'm just going to go and travel U.S., and just see what it's like. End up in Chicago, end up meeting my wife pretty early on. And effectively just getting together. And then that's one of those things where that wasn't my intention at all. And then next thing you know, I'm in there and
wow.
Yeah.
So things just solidified very quickly. Your wife, maybe you could talk a little bit about your wife, a nurse from Ukraine.
Yeah.
Maybe you can talk just a little bit about her background and what her life had been like up to the point that you two met in Chicago.
So she came also like she was very early on. She's actually the opposite. She in Ukraine, she did really well in studies. She was actually going for engineering. But then at some point, she decided that, listen, I want to spend like a little bit of time in U.S., so I'm just going to go and there's a program called Au Pair where essentially you come here and you are nanny for whatever time. And then while she was here, she kind of was researching stuff, and she saw that there were programs as far as nurses. So if you stay here, then you get a green card and all that. And that effectively she decided to do. And she started studying to nurse. And I already met her when she was in there. That was kind of our thing. And then, yeah, we're pretty quickly like, it was one of those things where I don't want to tell that to my daughters, but we started like, we kind of knew that like this is the right person and everything. And we kind of went from there. There wasn't much time on things. Like,
so love at first sight, or love within, the first few times of hanging out together.
That we met. And we realized that we're both sarcastic and still like to all the time joke and stuff like that. So it was very quickly. That. So
that's
again,
cool.
But it wasn't like the intention. My intention, essentially, like I think I was thinking about New Zealand at some point, because my idea was like, okay, I'm gonna go travel the U.S. and everything, but there were more I had more info on how you effectively can go to New Zealand and work and live there and stuff. And for some reason, don't ask me why, but I thought that New Zealand is the place to be.
It's a nice place.
It's a nice place. But again, if someone is going to ask me why you were thinking, like, what was the appeal of New Zealand? I'm like, I don't know. But when I was in England, I was like, I need to go to New Zealand. But I'm just going to go to U.S. and like essentially just visit the U.S. and see what it's like. And
well, I mean, we're thrilled that you decided to stay here.
So it wasn't really like planned and everything, and then we met. She was already in school, but I was essentially working. Again, I don't want to call them dead end jobs. You can essentially make the career out of it, but for me, it was definitely the case where, like, as I was working, because like in here, one of the things when you come and you have no education whatsoever, you like most likely you'll work in construction, and that's for whether it's an immigrant, whether that's like a person who's born here.
Yeah,
it's especially for male. That's like one of the most popular places to end up is construction, because there's always some building going on, and you can learn the job from the scratch. You just walk in there and you're like, say, okay, listen, you start from the very bottom, and then you keep going.
Yeah, did you ever work construction?
Yeah, I worked for like, I want to say after that, like for 5 years, because
5 years.
Yeah,
that's crazy. Like, I just want to stop and say I worked construction for 1 week, and then I went back to like Taco Bell or whatever. Like, I just couldn't handle it. Like, it was brutal, demolishing buildings and stuff like that. Like, just picking up heavy, jagged things like all day long, and your hands just get all calloused up. And maybe you could talk about that experience, because I'm not sure how many people listening to this have worked construction or appreciate the sheer, like, it is real work. Like me sitting at my computer with my headphones on, a cup of tea by my side, like, it's a very different vibe from like walking around a construction site with a hard hat on.
It's not gonna be we didn't have much, like, really. Like, we had like small apartment where we were just trying to survive, for more or less. And we realized that, listen, I need to work. Otherwise, if we both are going to be students, then we're going to take in 10,000s in student loans, and that's not, like, it's not going to be sustainable. So effectively, while she was studying, I was all the time working, and then effectively we flipped. So she started working, and then I went to the school. But construction, it definitely taught me a lot. It's one of those things where, it's like you just said, essentially every time I catch myself that, if something is hard as a developer, I'm like, do you remember what it was like? Because I used to, actually, towards the end of it, I was working on as a window installer. And that's even more, in my opinion, like, it's a good job in a sense that you can work all year round and everything, but it's pretty grueling, simply because you need to be done with that job in that day, because you already have scheduled for next day. So, for example, if I have to install these like 6 windows, I need to finish today. It's not the case where I'm like, okay, I didn't feel like it today or whatever, I'm going to show up tomorrow. No, that's not the case. So I remember essentially we were like gathering in the office already 6 in the morning, so we needed to get up at 5. And if the job takes longer, it takes longer. So if you're home at 8, you're home at 8, and there's like you're not going to go in and start complaining the next day. That's just the reality of the job. So again, many benefits as far as you constantly are employed and all that, but again, there's some drawbacks, and that definitely has helped me as far as, you know, when I need to study something or whatever, it's much easier to kind of like convince myself that, you know, listen, this is just peanuts compared to what I was doing.
So you can turn it on and you can push through like procrastination or other psychological blocks that you may encounter because you had to do that all the time as a window installer. There was no alternative.
Yeah, it's one of those things where essentially like I realized that like it's not the case where I can just simply, just because I don't like something, to quit my job, because I do have, like, my wife is studying, so it's not the case where I can just be like, well, today I don't feel like it, so I'm just going to quit. The idea was that, listen, we need to get through this moment. We will do it together. And that kind of, it has definitely helped me. Now, I'm not saying that I'm some kind of like, you know, superhero who can, listen, I still have those days where I'm like, listen, I don't feel like it, but I have like worked on the fact that you trick yourself. And worst case scenario, you just remind yourself about like what are potentially what were the options, like, and the alternatives.
Yeah.
And why this is much better. So you better like, you know, get your stuff together.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
Well, just keeping with the chronology, because there's so many, like I'm taking detailed notes as you talk, and I've already got like 46 paragraphs of notes, which sounds crazy. It's actually like 26 because I double space. But like, I'm going to keep these insights flowing, but I also want to get like caught up to like present day. So how long were you and your wife together before you decided to marry, to have kids? Like what was that span of time like in Chicago?
Oh, before marry, that's a good question. I would say like 1 year, something like that. So like,
yeah, but pretty fast. That's about how quickly I married my wife. Like we were married,
but we were
like
living
15
together
months.
literally like, you know, like a month or two. We were already like living. So yeah, and the kids were longer because again we had those plans where essentially one is going to finish the school, the second is going to finish the school, and then we were planning the family, and that effectively that's how it happened actually. So.
Yeah, so you planned everything out and everything kind of went according to plan. At what point?
Yeah, it was.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. It's actually one of those things that I always laugh about. But yeah, my wife is very good at those things, and everything that she planned out actually worked out exactly the same way.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry.
It's a recurring theme on the Free Code Camp podcast. People who come on the Free Code Camp podcast who have accomplished enough to like, I guess, weren't coming on here like you. They generally have a plan of sorts that, and they have the grit, I guess, the determination to stick to it. You talked about how your dad was like a really hard worker and he really prided himself in his work. And then, 5 years working construction and just having to get up and dust yourself off and go do it every day. Right. Yeah. So it sounds like hard work and planning are like a big part of your success so far. So where do you go from Chicago? Like, your wife eventually finishes nursing school. She worked as a nurse for quite a while.
Yeah. But effectively, the way it worked, we met. She was already doing that, and I was just like starting looking at the studies for a few reasons, because pretty early on, that was already after that 1 year and a half in England and everything, and I realized that, listen, there's gonna have to be some changes. Essentially, I need to go back to school. It's just, it maybe sounds like a great idea to, not to go to school. And again, we can get into the whole college and debt and all that. But I mean, depending on where you live in the world, I do still think that it's a good idea to go to school. And I realized that, and I was like, yeah, but at the moment I cannot do that simply because my wife is already studying. So what I was doing, essentially, I started slowly in community college. I was just taking classes, so I was usually, I was taking train to work. So train was in the morning and then the evening. And while I was in the evening, I was usually studying, whether that was getting some notes from the book or just watching some YouTube videos and stuff about like some specific topic, not just the beasts videos or anything like that.
Yeah,
so,
well, you're probably watching precursors to like John Smilga.
well, yeah. And so I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna basically follow the footsteps of my dad, and I'm just gonna go and study to be an engineer. And so I finished the community college, and that was the plan. But then once I went to school, there was like a big overlap between the electrical engineering and computer science. And I was very hesitant because in my head, I had this idea that you only do computer science if you're totally into games and if you're into that tech, and you need to be young. There's no way you can be like whatever, 30 years or whatever age, and then you can study. No, there's no way.
Yeah, so whenever you see a Hollywood movie, the engineer is always like some guy in his like 50s and 60s. He's got like gray hair and like a big beard, and he's like, we got to do this and this and this, or else this entire ship is gonna blow. you know and then the computer guy is always some like 19-year-old kid who has like poor social skills and like doesn't have any lived experience, but is really good with computers, right? Those are the stereotypes.
He has been doing that since he was 5 because no one played with him, and all that thing. And this is where FreeCodeCamp enters, because effectively what happened was I had this early inclination because we had some classes and everything, and I can see that coding. I really like coding, but it was just this mental block in my head where I'm like, no, you need to do something realistic. Basically, I was telling myself, you need to stick with the electrical because computer science is not for you. You basically the ship has sailed, and here comes Quincy Larson. Back then, I was watching. There's still probably a YouTube channel called Engineering Truth. And I saw you and you talk as always excitingly about coding, about everything, and I'm like I'm watching that video, and I'm like, no, I'm doing that. And that was kind of a big flip for me, that I was like, ever since I saw you, like you have one of those like qualities like that essentially like as ambassador for tech industry. That's just amazing that like instead of this kind of what is it called? Gatekeeping, right? Instead of it's like, hey, come on over, and I really liked your article, which you wrote one time, or you mentioned there that essentially you think of coding as for people like when they were learning how to read. You basically compared, and that kind of like really like made so much sense to me when I heard that or read your quote. I'm like, yeah, that definitely makes sense. Even if I do end up going, let's say, to electrical engineering, then coding is essentially like reading back in a day. Where you need to understand at least the general concepts and all that. So that was definitely the case.
I'll try to paraphrase myself. Essentially, I said like, during the agricultural revolution, it was beneficial to learn how to read, because then you could read how to use fertilizer. You could read the instructions for like new tractors and other tools and stuff like that. And during the industrial revolution as well, when cars came out, it was beneficial to learn how to drive. Like that was a huge source of economic value for so many people who were able to work as like truck drivers or taxi drivers or people that just could live somewhere less expensive and commute using a car, right? That became a big thing. And when Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel, like, obviously there was VisiCalc and there were word processors before those, but when those really got popularized in the 1990s, everybody just learned how to use them and they were way more productive for it. And I think learning how to use JavaScript is pretty similar. Learning how to use high-level scripting languages, right? And now learning how to use LLMs, large language models, in conjunction with other coding tools, in conjunction with databases and things like that. Like, I see them as just new skills that everybody should kind of put in the time to learn. And I genuinely do believe that pretty much everybody should learn at least how computers work. And if they can write some coding, great. If they can write some code, great. Like, there is no knowledge that is not power, right? There are no skills that are just useless. Like, I'm sure even though you don't think highly of your musical education, occasionally it comes up where you happen to know something that's useful, right?
That's one of those things that no, I even cannot like hold the tone, so I always stay off. That's I always laugh about that. And so that's like, first of all, I feel very honored that that interview that I did with I think his name Mike Tran, like Engineering Truth. Back in the day. Your I think your oldest one was like literally she came into the camera. She was like just toddler.
My
not
daughter.
Even a toddler.
Yeah. So that was like 7 years ago probably.
That was like a long time ago.
Yeah. So Wow. Okay. So you're like going to community college, you're studying engineering, electrical engineering. Like, of course, electrical engineering is similar to computer science. And in fact, at like Berkeley and a lot of other prominent schools, that they were like kind of the same joint degree. You would study both. Can you talk about like what that transition was like? Like, okay, I like coding. How did you start coding?
So going a little bit back, what I do want to mention, like I know that so essentially sometimes people complain about degrees effectively, but one thing I can say, maybe I'm not using the physics or chemistry or, calculus or whatever, but studying to understand that, like reading through those textbooks has definitely helped me when I have to go through the docs, because it just prepares you where, like, listen, there's a problem, you need to solve it. And you need to spend hours on just going through stuff. And those textbooks can sometimes be even more dry than the docs these days, because now everyone does an amazing job on like providing very useful docs. And so definitely from my perspective, even just for that, learning how to learn is just super useful, like going to school. Again, we can get into the whole depth thing and all that, but as far as community college, I don't regret for even 1 second that, spending those weekends and like evenings or whatever studying. And that's also something that it's always funny. Once you get kids, you realize how much actually time you had. So if we're talking about like coding as a skill that everyone, at least in some kind of shape or form, should know, it's definitely one of those things where before kids you realize you don't realize how much time you have on your hands and how much you're just wasting it away on YouTube videos and whatever. And then the moment you get the kids, you realize, oh, okay, I actually had all this time where I could have done something, right? So even though it sounds kind of like, well, yeah, everyone should know the code, but you don't need like to spend that much time, or at least understand the general concepts of how internet works and things like that nature. And the transition was pretty like, was kind of out of my control effectively. Like I made that decision that, I'm going to be essentially transferring from one degree to another one. But at that time already, my wife got the job offer in California, and it was like a no-brainer because we went for a road trip before that for like a month or so. We drove all the way from Chicago to San Diego and back through the United States, and we were like, okay, we're moving to California. But in order for me to transfer my credits, it was essentially, I looked at it that I need to start from the scratch in California. And I was like, well, there has to be a better way. And here again, freeCodeCamp comes into the picture, because I read Bo's article about the WGU, how he essentially finished
just everybody, like, you've probably seen him, but you may not know his name is pronounced Bo. It's not pronounced Bew, or it's like a French name. It's just pronounced like Bo, like a bow staff. And he's the gentleman that you see doing the intros on all the freeCodeCamp courses, including, I think, most of your courses. He does a quick intro. Yes. So yes, please continue. I just wanted to provide some context.
Yeah. And so I see Bo's article where he says how he finished the WGU. And I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Since we're now in California, I don't want to start from the scratch. I'm just going to finish WGU. I wasn't as fast as Bo, because at that point, while I was still in Chicago, effectively the moment I realized that I will have to do some coding, I already started recording some videos, because I noticed that and that was one of those things where I'm like, I'm going to start releasing those videos. In the beginning, they were like totally horrible. I believe I even started without any sound. It's just because I have a voice condition. So I didn't like how my voice sounded.
Can you talk about your voice condition? Like for me, it's incredibly distinct because you hear people like the lady on NPR. I'm trying to remember her name, but she has like a voice condition. But the result is, the moment you tune to NPR and you hear her voice, you're like, I know exactly who that is, and I know this is going to be a dynamite interview. It's going to be so good because she's so skilled at interviewing. So you have some form of like paralysis in one of your vocal cords?
Yeah, one of my vocal cords is essentially paralyzed. I only like started working on that actually like only a few years ago. And because I went to the doctors and they're like, well, technically there's nothing, like it's sort of permanent. No one knows why it happened and how. I always blame the music as a side note. The music school, of course it's not, but I'm just joking about that. But that was one of the things where I do need to get this, like certain injections, because otherwise they're not closing properly. And
Yeah.
it's a lot of times, like, for example, when I'm recording, it's kind of like, it literally can be sometimes hard for me to speak. So it really depends if I get the injection. So now I got my last injection like 3 months ago. So that's when you sent the invite. I'm like, okay, now it's a perfect time. If that would be in, like, let's say January, literally there was a time when I couldn't, like, even talk. And yeah, it's one of those things where that's why my voice, like, there is a, like, sometimes people complain like, hey, listen, what happened to your previous voice and all that, and they either think that it's that I'm sick or something, but it's not really the case. It's literally, it can change depending on the injection, depending on the surgery. It's one of those things where I constantly need to do something, otherwise, especially since I'm recording and using my voice so much, it kind of, I mean, goes bad pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Kind of that way. So
Yeah, so what happens when it goes bad? Like, Diane Rehm is the name of the lady I was talking about from NPR who recently retired. Epic, legendary interviewer, host of, what was it, All Things Considered? I can't remember the name of the show, but I think she eventually had like the Diane Rehm show or something like that. But she had like a neurological thing. So it wasn't actually mechanically something with her vocal cords. So
yeah.
you have an actual condition with one of your
mechanical,
vocal cords.
yeah. And essentially for me, it comes down to that I can speak for like 2 minutes and then I have to cough. It's kind of like one of those things where, so imagine like recording a 10-minute video, right? Where not only you mess up when essentially you do some coding mistakes, but you talk and then it just cracks up the voice and you need to clear the throat. And that kind of is my, it goes from the voice is good and then slowly it deteriorates again. Because again, you cannot really fully like make them close because one of them is paralyzed. So you can only do it like temporarily, like just fix it. And then again, it goes bad.
Okay.
So,
yeah. Well, that combined with your Latvian accent, I think explains why you sound so distinctive and why your voice is instantly recognizable to anybody who's like learning to code. They've probably heard your voice, and I wouldn't be surprised if they were like, oh, wait, I know who that is. Even though I didn't remember his name, I think I've heard his voice before, right?
Yeah, that's definitely one of those cases.
Yeah. So,
and I'm sorry, just to encourage anyone who's like non-English speaking, effectively, if you're thinking about doing videos, you should, because it's one of those things that I didn't realize where essentially I was always like, I'm not a fan that I cannot get rid of the accent. It's always going to be there. At the same time, there is a benefit. There's many people who are non-English speakers. Maybe my vocabulary is not as, wide as someone else's.
Yeah.
And you can use some simple terms and in some sort of accent and stuff. So if you are a non-English speaker, you definitely should do it, just because you don't know how many people actually will resonate with your voice, with your accent and all that. So, yeah.
I'll give a very quick anecdote personally. When I lived in China, like right after I started graduate school, I moved to China and I lived there for 5 or 6 years, basically waiting for my wife to be able to get like a green card to be able to come to the U.S. And when I was doing my intensive Mandarin program, I wasn't talking with a lot of native Chinese speakers. There were like the teachers, all the classes were in Chinese and everything like that. I was the only Guilo on campus, or the only Waiguoren. Guilo is like the rude kind of Cantonese way of saying it because it sounds like ghost. But I was the only Waiguoren or Waiguo Pengyo, the foreign friend.
I'm sorry, I have to say, I always find these when someone is like when they have those terms for white people somewhere else, I just find them super funny. I don't know why. Every time, like let's say gringos, and all, I just crack up. Continue. Sorry.
Well, frankly, white people are not really disadvantaged anywhere. Like in China, people would give me they didn't look at me and say, "Oh, this guy's going to speak native level Chinese." I could some of them would talk very slowly to me, which is very kind. But the way I learned most of my Chinese was not from Chinese speakers; it was from Koreans who stayed in the dormitory with me. So my roommate was Korean, everybody was Korean, and they had all come to China to learn international trade. And as part of that, they needed to learn Chinese because China, Korea, huge trading partners, just like the U.S. and China, but even more so. So having that experience of just constantly talking to Korean people in Chinese because they couldn't speak English and I couldn't speak Korean, Chinese was our lingua franca, and we had that restricted vocabulary, and we were just better at he's not using the tone correctly, but I kind of understand what he means. Like it just builds. There's this affordance that is built in when you're talking with a non-native English speaker, or in my case, a non-native Chinese speaker. And it is dramatically easier. So I can definitely see the benefit in having people creating tutorials for programming in English that like you yourself are going to probably use a more restricted vocabulary, because like I grew up speaking English. Like I'm going to use all these weird, Yankee expressions that people aren't familiar with. I'm going to do all these weird American pop culture references and stuff that people that grew up outside the U.S. may not have any idea what that means, like without thinking. Right. So it immediately increases the difficulty of comprehending what I'm saying if you've only been studying English for a few years, for example. So, yeah, it is absolutely valuable. And I'll just kind of second what you just said, John, that even if you're not like the best English speaker, you should still record tutorials. Even if you have a voice condition, record tutorials. Like it is helpful. And at the very worst, you're going to record tutorials that not very many people watch, but just the act of teaching something is the best way to solidify your own knowledge. Yeah, and teachers often know stuff much better than practitioners. Maybe the best combination is, of course, a teacher / practitioner, somebody who's worked in the field and now teaches it or continues to work in the field and teaches. But I digress. So, John, so you're in California, of course, the Golden State. Did you take Route 66 to get out there?
Some parts of it, yeah.
Yeah, because I think it runs from Chicago to Los Angeles.
Yeah, I think we deviated in some places. I believe we went there twice. So one time was for the road trip, and second time when we were actually moving. We were deviating because we went to we were in Sacramento at the time. So our route was a little bit different, and first time we went through Wyoming, we were not fans of Wyoming, simply because it was literally one of those things where you drive into Wyoming, you have a hailstorm, and then you drove into Utah, and you have sunny sky and clear, and it was like just this one of those like movie moments, right? So you're literally driving through the hailstorm, like we got the crack in the windshield and everything, and then the moment we drove into Utah, the sky is clear and the sun is like blasting. We were like, nope, no more Wyoming. No,
and my apologies. Like I hope Wyoming's not always like that, and I hope you didn't get too bad of an impression. But Utah has some amazing natural beauty for sure. And I have made the drive to California and back from Oklahoma City, not from Chicago. So slightly shorter, I think. But like that's a big endeavor. So you get out to California. Your wife is now working as a nurse, and you decided to go to WGU, Western Governors University, which is an online degree program. It's a good school. It's accredited. And they only have a few programs. One of them is software development.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what you studied. Same thing that Bo Carnes from FreeCodeCamp, that runs the FreeCodeCamp YouTube channel and is helping me with this video, get this video up onto YouTube. Thanks, Bo.
We can make another podcast about Bo. Sorry to interject, but the things that like the creative things he has done as far as how he has flipped the YouTube space, it's just amazing. Yeah, sorry, something. Yeah, it's just huge fan of his work.
Yeah, he's a huge inspiration for me, and it's a joy to work alongside him. He's just a chill, down to earth family man like you and I, right? Like I feel like I have so much in common. Not that I have a lot of his characteristics as a teacher. Like he's just an incredible teacher. So how was the WGU experience? Because I always tell people like, I'm a big fan of university, and yes, I can totally see people saying like, oh, university's overpriced, blah, blah, blah. And I agree. And that's why FreeCodeCamp, of course, we're working on eventually having a free accredited university degree program that will take another 10 or 15 years to finish preparing. Sorry, it's taking so long, but it's a big project. But in the meantime, BGU is a good alternative to that. And it's very inexpensive not necessarily compared to community college, especially California community college programs are very inexpensive. And if you happen to live in California, absolutely attend community college. It's one of the best educational experiences you can have in the United States. But what was that like?
That's exactly the point what I was going to make. Like, listen, I do agree that universities are super expensive, but you can definitely always start with community college. You will get service, if not even better, because essentially in there they have time to work with you. Right, so you just need to spend time on essentially looking for, like, maybe I was doing quite a bit of research where essentially I was looking for, not the easiest, for example, chemistry teacher, but the one that actually teaches, the one that spends time with you instead of just like giving you the textbook and all that. So I was definitely doing that, and like community college is an awesome way to actually see whether that's for you to begin with, and second, it just prepares you for the school. And I was just really lucky that WG accepted all the credits. But what was happening, so at that time I was already recording videos, and essentially that the second half year was like I was kind of doing it half, I would say half time, not like part time. Sorry, part time.
Yeah. And I want to talk about the mechanics of your success as a tutorial creator, course creator. You have nearly 200,000 subscribers on Coding Addict, which is the name of your YouTube channel, which has 786 videos uploaded. They say quantity has a quality all its own. There's quite a bit of quality in that quantity, I imagine. And then, of course, many of your courses, we've anthologized them and published them on freeCodeCamp's YouTube channel. Yeah. You also, of course, have Udemy, where you've got a lot of courses listed. Maybe before we I want to talk about the entrepreneurial aspect of this, because you've essentially built a business around helping teach people how to code, right?
So it was one of those things where effectively the moment I started recording videos, like I mentioned, there was those two benefits, right? So I can research the topic and then I can always get some info back. But then also slowly but surely there was like this bug just in your head where effectively the moment I learned something, I just want to make a video. And it's not about whether it's going to get 10,000 views or whatever. It's just one of those things like, listen, I just learned it. I just figure out like some kind of way, some kind of like small app or some kind of small instance where that could be super useful. Let me make a video about it, right? So and then mentally in my head, I'm like, okay, that's done. I can kind of move on to a second thing. And it was one of those things where it just like, you produce one video, second, you do more research, you start working on your own projects, you record more, and it just kind of took off. But it's one of those like unfortunate things where essentially it's like it's impossible to survive off YouTube. There's no like if you want to keep doing that, then there needs to be some kind of revenue income. Like I mean, in a perfect world, I would just take everything and upload on YouTube and just call it a day. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So I enjoy really teaching and recording videos, but at the same time, you do need to have some kind of stream of income. So over the years, I have kind of come up with at least in my opinion, like the best case scenario, at least for me at this point, where essentially I have like I make a large course, I make a large chunk of that for free, and then effectively if people enjoy the style, if they enjoy the content, if they are willing to support, then they can, pay some extra money, and then effectively they can buy the entire course, right? But they already have the good idea that whether they like it or not. So it's not the case where you need to essentially spend the money and be like, okay, I don't really like him, I don't like his accent, I don't like his style, or whatever. So yeah, that kind of has been my approach. But to tell you honestly, I'm not like Elon Musk, type of like, oh, I'm just gonna build this amazing business. For me, it literally comes down to like, I just enjoy kind of terminology, or there's some type of like function that does something. For me, I think the biggest bug is to kind of how I can like make an example out of this that makes sense. Not just, okay, everyone can read the docs and say like, okay, this function is doing such and such, but okay, but what would be the perfect use case, right? What would be the perfect use case and the one that wouldn't require you like 3 hours of prepare or something like that. So that to me has always been, that's what drives me back, right? So when people say that every job has some downsides and whatever, right? So for me, sometimes it's recording, right? Because it's just, sometimes it's the actual recording process is, I'm not, there's some challenges, but as far as preparing the content, it's just like, that's what makes me kind of like get up in the morning, like super excited, because I know that, like Next.js came out with this new thing. Let's see what we can do, or what we can build with that. Like what kind of, like in which instances this is going to be super like helpful, like let's say better than the previous one. So yeah, that was kind of, that's the idea. And again, I need to bring in freeCodeCamp. When I was, essentially this is what I did. I produced the HTML and CSS course. I put stuff for free on YouTube, and I got an email from Bo, who's running the freeCodeCamp, and he's like, are you okay with essentially like reposting this? And I was like, yeah, we had a meeting and everything. I'm like, oh yeah, sure. Everything's awesome, and we can do that and all that. And yeah, next thing we know, he posted, and that kind of took off the whole, like, making the content and then producing courses. Yeah, it just that one email and then the partnership kind of just helped really.
Well, I just want to observe that, like, your business model is very transparent. Like, hey, if you like this multi-hour segment of this course and you want to buy the entire course, how much are most of your courses?
I'm mostly at least 20 hours.
20 hours. And how much do they cost if you want to buy like a full course?
So Udemy has the specific policy of prices. So it's one of those things where they run on this kind of sales thing, right?
Yeah.
So
everything's always 90%.
It's one of those things where in some cases it's actually, let's say, it's interesting. So let's say one day they can have it for like whatever, I don't know, $80, right? But on the other day when they have the promotion, as much as like bad rep Udemy gets, at the same time, for example, they sell those courses for whatever, $11, but in a local currency.
Yeah.
Right. So that's even like essentially what the students are telling me, that's even cheaper. So it's not just like $10, let's say, in some other places is going to be actually way more because if you transfer. But they kind of see what $10 would mean in US and what that like means in some other country, and then they make it actually the price very reasonable, so the price, in my opinion.
Pricing power, purchasing parity or something like that. I can't remember what PPP stands for. But yeah.
It's one of those terms that like I read it, I understand it, but I'm like, I don't have enough courage to pronounce it and explain it.
But my point is, these are not like $1,000 to learn to code type. Like you'll see these things. You'll see people like, my complete coding course is only $1,000. And I find people all the time on like Twitter, like, hey, like what do I do? Like I used my entire educational budget on this one course from this guy who promised that I was going to learn everything I needed to know about coding, right? And like, so a lot of people come to freeCodeCamp. We call them like refugees from other course platforms and things like that. But I will say, if you like, I'm not an absolutist. Like I say education wants to be free, but like at the same time, there are many, many thoughtful teachers and creators who have kids to feed, who want to, be able to pay their mortgage and stuff like that. Paying $15, $20, $50, $100 for a course is not a big deal if you have the money. I spent that much money on learning how to play bass and stuff. I like buy a bass course or something like that. I think it's totally fine to spend money on courses. You don't have to, of course, but if you want to, John Smilga has amazing courses, and I will say that he does not under-deliver. A lot of people out there overpromise and under-deliver, and I can say with confidence that you've never done that because, like, you've already got this huge chunk of the course that's completely free, made freely available both through your YouTube channel or through freeCodeCamp.org, and it's just like there's this concept in economics called consumer surplus. And what it is like you create X amount of value and you capture, Y amount of value. I'm not sure if I'm doing it justice, like explaining it correctly, but like Wikipedia would be an example of a site that creates a tremendous amount of value and captures a very small amount of it. A software as a service, sales, database type program might capture something closer to like 50% of the value they ultimately create. You're helping the customer increase their sales by 50%, or by 100%, but you're charging them, 50% of that to use your platform or something like that, right? So like those are the extremes, right? Like Wikipedia down here, Craigslist maybe here, and then like, obviously freeCodeCamp would be like way down there with Wikipedia in terms of people just donating and things like that. And most small independent course creators like you, like Coder Jessica Chan, like Wes Boss, all these people, like what they are charging for their courses is almost nothing compared to the value that you're going to get out of taking these courses and then going and selling your labor on the open market for software engineers, right? Much from John. So I just want to very quickly clarify that like there are a lot of things that keep me up late at night about education and the direction things are heading and things like that. But like course creators on YouTube and on Udemy and, you know, creating their own platforms and stuff. You've got your own website, which I think is so cool that your name, John Smilga, JS, and you happen to teach JS, you teach JavaScript, but it's just
I never thought
johnsmilga.com, coding addict. Because your like fab icon on johnsmilga.com is like JS, and it kind of, you should like make it yellow and yellow and black like the JS.
I
logo.
never thought of that.
Yeah,
I should have done that.
Yeah, so like maybe you could talk about what your life has been like since you started creating courses and teaching. I mean, at this point, it's got to be millions of people that have gone through at least part of one of your courses on FreeCodeCamp. I'm sure it's millions of people. And you probably have like analytics on like how many people, like according to Udemy, I think you have like, let's see, on Udemy, it was like, okay, let's take a look. 100 students, you've got 27,000 reviews. Those are people that bought the course, took the course, and took the time to leave a review about it. That probably a positive review, right? That's a pretty big impact that you've had over the past, 7 or 8 years. How long have you been creating courses?
Oh, I think I want to say, well, I would like courses, I believe 2017, 18, something like that.
So about like 7 years probably. And
yeah.
I mean, the ground you have covered. We were talking about YouTube just a second ago, more than 700 videos. Maybe you can talk about what your life has been like before and after you became a creator. Because my understanding is your wife is able to focus on taking care of your kids full time. And does she work as a nurse at all anymore? Is she like part-time or?
No. So luckily at the moment we can have a setup where she's a stay-at-home mom. We have 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and we decided, at least for now, again, everything is fluid, so everything might change. But since my oldest one, technically, she was born in August, so it's she doesn't need to start the elementary school right now. She can still technically wait a year, but we decided that regardless, we're most likely going to go with homeschool. That for now seems to be a good option. My wife is super good at also teaching.
Yeah.
She's like super into it. I mean, she just sits and researches the math, the reading, and what are the options, where are the best books, and what we can do. And I don't know, it just seems like it's also better for the girls because she was going for, but that was the private kindergarten. Mm-hmm. And actually, the little sister didn't like that if the older was gone, and the bigger one also, when she came back, she was like, basically she likes it better at home. And then my wife can actually study with both of them, so the little one sits there and also is like, adding 2 plus 2 and stuff like that. Yeah. So we were able to do that. Just to add a little bit on those courses, I always, just naturally, not because I made some big commitment, but I always looked up to freeCodeCamp and stuff, and I made this decision where I'm not going to be trying to sell something which is not true. I would never say in my course, hey, listen, finish this course and you'll get a job, because I personally know that there's no course in the world that can teach you that. Instead, you should be going and networking and doing all those things instead of, I would even say at this point, I don't want to maybe use this term, but coding, it's not the hardest part. Right? It's not easy. Right. It still takes time, but it's actually, in order to get a job and to get an industry, there's tons of other things you need to do. Coding at this point, there's so many courses that if you stuck to it, if you are not just buying 10,000 courses just for the sake of buying, even though it feels great, trust me.
Yeah, it feels great to buy a course.
I have lots of jiu-jitsu courses, and trust me, it hasn't made me better, but it's just that feeling when you buy it and everything's great. And actually, you learn way more in the actual class. But anyway, that's a side point. But there is tons of these resources, courses, freeCodeCamp and YouTube and everything. If you really dedicate your time, you can learn all of that for a very small fraction of price. But unfortunately, since communication is a kind of a strange topic in a sense, because some people are super good at it, and for example, I'm not, right? And it's one of those things where you tell somebody, they're asking hey, listen, which course I should take in order to get in the industry? And it's one of those things where I say, listen, there's no course in the world that can do that for you, because the first thing you need to do is get into your local community and start talking to the people who actually work there, because they'll tell you what you need to learn, what is required actually in that part of the world where you live. And usually when you say that, you just see the people come on. Like I was expecting something, to get some better answer, but that honestly is the truth. And that's why I never want to like kind of make something like give some false promises in the sense that, get this and then everything is going to be fine. The way I view the content creation in general is something like, listen, if somebody spends some time to like I mentioned before, make this into something useful. Let's say there's some kind of feature, and they spend their time on working on the example on feature or whatever. That's something where I'm like, yeah, you know what? I want to support that person, whether that's watching through the YouTube video or paying some money in order to help them. But at the same time, I'll get some valuable info also, right? So that has always been my case. And I kind of made the decision that, listen, if it's not going to be sustainable, well, then I'll have to, effectively just do something else in a sense, like, just go back to work. But I don't want to turn into this like, hey, never-ending sales pitches and stuff. It's just not for me. I definitely know that, and I'm not even going to try that.
There are so many people coming into the software development space, and I always say, like, currently there are about maybe 30 million working professional software developers on Earth, and that number is only going to go up. Like, don't believe the hype that like AI is just gonna like take care of everything. I get these questions all the time. Like, software engineers are still going to be involved, in making important decisions about software and architecture and features, design, all these different things, right? Like, it will be a very long time. I don't think it'll happen in our lifetime where like it's like the Jetsons. You just press a button and then finished production level grade software just rolls out of the assembly line. No, I don't think that's going to happen. I think what's likely to happen is over the next 20, 30 years, more and more will be pushed to the software layer. Individual developers will become more productive. Maybe wages won't stay at their stratospheric levels that you have. I have developer friends who make $800,000 a year working as software developers. They're not even managers, right? I don't think that that's necessarily going to be what the future holds in terms of like it being this incredibly highly paid job, but I do think it'll be a really good job. It's going to be a job where you have like high quality of life. You're getting to do creative work. You're getting to use, cutting edge tools as they come out. And as a result, if we're doubling the number of developers, if there are 60 million developers on Earth by the time I die, hopefully, 100 years from now or something, then I think that that's so many people coming into the field that it can support a lot of teachers, right? And what's the worst thing that happens? I mean, you said yourself, like, oh, I just got to go get a cushy software engineering job somewhere, right? With my incredible, collection of skills that I built up teaching over the past 7 years, right?
Yeah, it was just kind of, in my case, it was always like, listen, even in the worst case scenario, the fallback is not like, it's not something that I would ever complain about. My idea is that it's just, as I was looking to you and reading, like, for example, your story of how the commitment you made to Free Code Camp, I just like knowing how I am in a sense where I'm like super bad in this like sales pitches and whatever. I just made the commitment that, listen, if everything is going well, awesome. If not, then I'll just have to make, certain choices, which again is something that I was working towards anyway. It's just, I didn't expect that teaching was something that I really enjoy that much. But it's, again, this is totally fluid situation. As far as I wouldn't even say teaching, and before teaching, like biggest difference for us was the kids. Like, it just changes everything.
Absolutely.
And this is the fact where the fact that I can still manage my schedule is just super helpful. With the fact that I can, I've been able to be involved in my kid's life, and that just been, it's one of those things where people say that, and and it sounds cheesy and whatever, but it is the case where I have been, able to teach my daughter how to ride a bike. We're like, we go swimming together and stuff like that, and those things are the ones that actually matter in the long term, right? Because it's one of those things I've been kind of a little bit obsessed lately, that I'm thinking that of course we all do important things, but at the end of the day, I don't know, based on my experience, what I'm seeing, it's like work is super important, but at the end of the day, 20 years or 30 years from now, like maybe we give it too much of a kind of importance, where essentially it's important at the moment in work. I'm not saying not to work, but there are things that actually like are far more important, and that's been super awesome that I've been able to do.
That's
kind
one of the reasons.
Combine everything.
That's one of the reasons I'm so hyped about helping more people gain these skills, is because I do firmly believe, like, I feel incredibly blessed to be able to basically hang out with my kids all day, every day. Like, they're a little older now; they're 6 and 8, and we moved to Texas to a district that has like a really good school district that's public, where I can walk my kids to school and we can live in the burbs. And, you know, it's kind of like the American dream of like the 50s or 60s, right? Like, we're here, like pretty much everybody in our neighborhood is an immigrant from China or the Middle East or Africa. Like, they all moved here because this is like, there's a good school here. There's a high quality of life. The level of affordability is great compared to California, where I was living previously, where you used to live. Now you're over in Florida, right?
Yeah, we're in Sarasota.
Yeah. So that's really cool that you were able to move out there. Your wife doesn't need to work anymore. My wife doesn't need to work anymore as an accountant. Again, I feel very privileged to be in that circumstance where I can hang out with my kids. And I genuinely believe more people can do this, especially now that employers are kind of waking up to the fact that, like, oh, you know, people can work remotely. They still get things done, even if you're not standing over them with your arms crossed, like making them punch in and, you know, or installing weird, maybe some companies install software to track like whether you're actually doing keystrokes and stuff. But like, obviously we don't use any of that stuff at freeCodeCamp. It's like very laissez-faire, so to speak. But I think this is how humans are supposed to be able to live, not like dropping their kids off at daycare and coming home at like 6 p.m. and everybody's stressed out. Nobody's had enough sleep. Like, I don't feel like that window of time was representative of what human experience is supposed to be like. I mean, if you look at the agrarian period that basically preceded the industrialization, people spent a ton of time with their kids, right?
Yeah, it was one of those things that I do still remember from, I believe, even when I went into community college for a history lesson. One of the first things that we were discussing the ancient, like I think very, very beginnings of the humans, and essentially he asked like how. Like the collectors and gatherers, or
the hunters and gatherers, yes.
Hunters and gatherers. Like how many hours do you think they worked? Like, and everyone's like, oh, 8, 9, something. And they're like, no, the idea is that they were like worked few hours and then they pretty much rested the entire day.
Yeah.
And again, it's not. I fully understand that this is a luxury and everything, and I definitely appreciate that. But I'm just saying that for me, it was never the case where, like putting all the time work at the very top, I don't think it's particularly useful, especially like, you know, 20, 30 years from now. I really don't. So it's always like, it's just finding that good balance where I enjoy my work. Don't get me wrong. Like, I enjoy getting up and working on stuff, but there has to be a cutoff where it's not, you know, it's not the primary thing.
And just by improving your skills and improving your productivity through designing processes, you know, automating things, you can get the same amount of work done in less time. And that, like I still work, you know, 40 hours a week, but I do so from the convenience of my own home, in my office here at my standing desk where I'm recording this podcast interview. Like, and I just automate a lot of stuff where I rethink the process. Why is this taking so much time each week? Is there a better way, you know, and just gradually refining it. And then I can move on and do more interesting work that's not solved, so to speak. Solved work, by the time it's automated, it's essentially solved. And other than basic maintenance, you shouldn't need to come back to it. You can go do other things, right? Like, I didn't have time to do podcast interviews before because I was so busy working on other aspects of freeCodeCamp. But as I've gradually had more time free up, I can do things like this. And I'm super grateful for that. I'm super grateful for the technology that enables this, and that I'm super grateful to my past self who put in the time and energy to learn how to use these technologies so that I could essentially and I imagine that, like, maybe I'll never need to retire. Maybe I'll just be able to keep finding new problems to work on, and the work will remain fresh and interesting. Yeah, I'm very optimistic about that. How do you feel about the future? Like, you're still pretty young. You're like slightly younger than me. You've got 2 young kids. What does the next 20 years hold for you?
Well, that's actually a super good question, because we are in the process. I mean, it's not going to happen tomorrow or whatever, but we clearly made our mind that in, like, I would say 2 years max, simply because we just need to basically complete some things in here. But in general, we are moving back to see parents more often, because our parents are both getting old, and
Yeah.
we just decided that it's one of those things where we do want our kids to spend more time with them, and that's definitely going to be like very interesting, because we just enjoy Europe for some reason. I don't know. Every
Yeah.
time we visit, it's like my wife is just ecstatic about it. So it's definitely going to be the case where essentially we're going to be moving.
Yeah.
After that, I don't know. So it's one of those things where I'm just like looking at that, and it's definitely going to be the case where I do want to stick with homeschooling my kids. I just think that it's an awesome way to actually spend more time with my kid.
Yeah.
I realized that teaching them math and reading, and it's actually like super fun.
Yeah.
Right. So it doesn't have to be this like, hey, you do this as I say. Instead, you're just engaging with it. You're trying to understand, like, what's the reason why you're not getting it? What's the reason why you're looking everywhere else but the book and stuff like that? So that has been super exciting. And
Yeah, just on homeschooling, like, you know, your kids have two well-educated parents who are multilingual, multicultural, have all this lived experience to impart to them. And so, yeah, like, I think that's amazing. You're able to spend so much time teaching them. I taught my kids to read individually. Like, we would just read every night before we got in the bath and stuff. And yeah, over the course of like a couple years, they got pretty good at reading. And it's just, you know, a little bit of incremental, but it was so amazing. It's such an amazing process. Like, if you have young kids, I strongly encourage teaching them how to read yourself. Like, you, of course, they're probably going to, if they go to school, they'll probably get some exposure to it too, but like, they can learn to read much faster than like the public school system is going to prepare them to read. Right. And it's just such an amazing, like, miraculous process of watching them sound things out and say all these weird things and like make common, you know, grammatical mistakes, like irregular verbs and stuff like that. And just watching it gradually get ironed out over time. Like, I'll never forget the process of my son being able to finally recognize that THE spelled the, because it's such a weird, you know, word, like, or the, or whatever. It depends on where it is in the sentence. Right. And just little things like that, or learning how to read the word bright, like BRIGHT. Like, how do you know, and watching them struggle with it and then explaining irregular, you know, or silent consonants and things like that. And like, yeah, I love teaching, and teaching my kids was just like, it was an absolute highlight of my life so far. So I just want to say, like, I think your kids are really lucky to have you teaching them, and your wife teaching them as well. You said that you were planning to go back to Europe. Of course, Latvia is a great place. Like, I have a friend, Islam Mahfouz, who runs Codezilla. And his wife is Latvian, I believe, and so he's been living there for a long time. He moved there.
Actually, what's interesting, tech scene is booming in Latvia. I'm not that familiar with the web dev, but as far as I know, because my brother works as he's a software, like, he's more a manager. He's not coding himself, but he works for a pretty big bank in the region. And essentially what he all the time keeps saying, that there's like super big need for Java developers. Like literally they have like very, very progressive programs of how to get people actually into the tech. So you, like, in the United States, I haven't seen that often, where essentially they literally can take someone from the street, as long as they show interest, they will teach them. They will try to give them the internship. Yes, it's going to be for very, very low money in the beginning, but they can get their foot in the door, and then they slowly move up, because there's quite a few big companies that are actually internationally recognized, and also there's quite a few gaming companies. So that's one of those interesting things where, as far as tech scene in Latvia, it's, again, things are fluid, but at the moment they're actually, it's kind of booming and everything. So yeah, I just don't know about the web dev much.
Yeah, well, that sounds really cool. One country that obviously is not having quite a nice time, that your wife is from, Ukraine, which has been, you know, illegally, and you're not going to get any sympathy. Like, I very much am on a side, and that side is Ukraine here in this conflict. And of course, your wife being from Ukraine, on your Twitter profile, you have the Ukrainian flag, and you say, "We stand with Ukraine." How is your wife's family doing back there? Are they okay?
It's one of those things where essentially how long the war has been going on already, right? So 2 years, right? And it's like you're more or less like normalizing this, but in general, it's one of those things where it's even hard to explain. Her brother was in the war. He went to serve. He got essentially he was wounded, so he was able to come back home. But it's the things that you see, the things that he like, is told us and everything. It's one of those things where you think that we're living in 21st century, and this is
Yeah.
how this is even possible. It's mind boggling, and it's super super rough in a sense. Like, I mean, there's so many aspects that are just tragic about it. When you just walk like, I don't know, 5 miles with all your belongings and two small kids across the field just to get out and things like that. And I'm not even talking about like, the horrors of the war and everything, or the rockets flying and all that. It's been one of those things where like I really like tick off like basically every time, like even think about it and all that. And it's just sad that there's not enough like kind of help to just kind of get rid of this. And for me, I always I find it interesting where I do see that people in like a lot of people in Western countries, they don't know what it's like to live right next to Russia, and that whole like mentality. There's always these excuses. Well, only if the NATO wouldn't be expanding and all that stuff, where essentially the only NATO is the only thing that keeps us safe for now, technically, in Latvia, because otherwise, every time you're seeing this, like those things happen that are not NATO countries. So this kind of mentality, like I was like even mentioned before a little bit, where like when we grow up and we still do in Latvia, let's say the fact that there any moment the war can break out is real. It's not some like that, family history. Like, for example, my granddad had to emigrate to United States. So during the World War II, essentially the country was split up, and he just called in. He basically, the German soldiers came to his house and said, listen, either we kill you right now or you go. And he was basically digging the trenches or whatever, right, as the front was moving back. After the war, he was, obviously he went through the process of like, checking whether he was not in the army and all that stuff. He passed all that, but he could never go back to, for example, Latvia. So it was one of those things where those stories are real. It's not just made up. So everything, like how the world works. And yeah, for us it was like in Latvia, everybody you talked to, they were all like, everyone around that, like those Soviet countries and whatever, we know what it's like. We know what it means, like freed by Russians, right? That especially, it just means simply genocide. That's it, So it's been one of those cases where we're like trying to help as much as possible, like people back in Ukraine and the families who have migrated over here, and just looking for options, like what we can do and all that. But yeah, it's one of those things where I can just it's hard to kind of explain in a nutshell, like everything that we're going through, what we're thinking, and like how we feel about it. So
I my friend Sergey, who runs Crowdin, which is a localization tool. We have a Crowdin course on freeCodeCamp that we recently published, taught by Esfania. Excellent tool if you want to localize your website into different languages and you want to use human translation instead of just using Google Translate or something. Of course, they're a Ukrainian company, and so he's running this entire tech startup basically out of a war zone. And when the war broke out like a couple years ago, I sent him a message. I was like, man, are you okay? Like, is everything going all right? And he just sent me back this meme, and it was like this meme of like the headache, and it was like migraine. It was like tension headache, and then it's like the whole head is red, and it said living next to Russia.
Yeah, I mean, like, listen, there's many Russians who are very forward thinking and whatever, but there's many who are stuck in this idea that like essentially like it or not, they don't think like of us, like the smaller countries, as basically that we even are allowed to exist. Either we are like part of their like stratosphere or we don't exist. And that is kind of like okay, but where do we go from here? Like, what is the solution? And that's why I've been like, yeah, super like kind of big on that. The fact that, listen, the only way how you can get peace is essentially just expelling them from there, because no other, like, all the time saying that we just need to appease them in some kind of way. I don't see how that is happening, because when we're looking from that perspective that we just need to give them something, you're looking from the perspective of the West, where essentially no one would even start that war to begin with. Where yes, there's like logical sense. Okay, let's agree on something, right? But that's not how you, like, in that part of the world. That's not how you think. That's not how you view things. There's people who are willing to live off nothing as long as their country is on that big shiny hill, whatever that hill is. And you're not going to change them by just, okay, let's give them this territory or that territory. And it doesn't like work that way, unfortunately.
Yeah, their
right?
worldview is just that, like,
yeah,
it's tied up in some weird, like, I've seen kind of the maps that Putin points to when he tries to justify that, like, these parts were part of historical Russia or whatever. And it's like, the map is constantly, it's just like China with their territory disputes, like, oh, at one point this was part of China too. And like, I'm sure like every country to an extent is probably guilty of like trying to grab a little extra property, from their neighbors and stuff. Many wars have been fought over just tiny territorial disputes and stuff. But yeah, like, to the credit of a lot of Russians that write me every week, like, how can I get out of Russia? I don't want to live here anymore. Like, I talk to people. We've got a refugee from Russia and plenty of refugees from Ukraine living in my neighborhood, going to school with my kids, right? And it's just like, it sounds like it's just a really big catastrophe to be born in that part of the world in this century. Like, there's just so much additional headache, so much additional stress. Like, why is this happening in 2024 between two countries that are, relatively prosperous, certainly compared to any nation in like the 19th century or the 18th century or anything before that, right? Like, Ukraine is basically the breadbasket of Europe, and Russia has more like minerals than like, and they have like all this land. I don't know. It's like wild to me. Why is there this conflict? Why can't they work it out? But then you look at somebody like Putin and you see that he's just craving and he'll never stop.
Well, that's why it was so super funny for me, where like Tucker Carlson goes over there and he's trying to make this point, essentially what he has been singing, right? So it was all because of NATO and blah, 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 blah. And yet in that interview for half an hour or whatever long he goes back to whatever 12th century. And you're like, so you want to justify this at the end of the day? Like, so you are even giving him the platform
it's
to
like
speak.
Pre-colonial period.
And he keeps going back to whatever times, right? And that's one of those things where it's super interesting to me that, like, for example, in the United States, I never saw that for like, let me give you just an example, right? So there was an Iraq war. First of all, many people were against it. And now look at the situation here. It's actually a topic which is discussed, where people say, hey, listen, we don't want to get involved, let's say, with our soldiers. We don't want to go and spread democracy or whatever. So my point being here, there is like people are talking about it. They're discussing it and they're saying, listen, this was wrong. We shouldn't have done that or whatever, but we will move on. But what people don't like, because for some weird reasons, a lot of times, like, Americans compare themselves to like that. Like, they say, yeah, but look at us. We also, there are some clear issues, but the difference is in democracy, those things are discussed. It's not like right now, let's say England is saying, hey, listen, United States, you used to be our colony, right?
Yeah.
Why don't we make that again, right?
Yeah.
There's actually, both countries are working together. They moved on. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like even after World War.
Yeah.
Like, everybody's just kind of like
Germany and France.
Yeah, years later, and like, or it's not even that long, right? Like, people are like, and they've kind of like acknowledged the sins of the fathers, so to speak, and they've moved on, and obviously that needs to happen. With the Baltic states, right? Like that needs to happen over in Eastern Europe too. Again, I apologize. I'm not an expert in any of these things, but just intuitively, as like, I guess, a person who has a right to talk and represent America on this very limited podcast, I think it's ridiculous that any American would support Russia in this very obvious, very illegal, very flagrant, land grab, frankly.
No, well, it's just like an easy kind of excuse. Like, listen, this is basically to blame NATO for it. But like, I think a lot of times what's missed out on the conversation that all of those countries, for the same reason, because they know what it's like to live right next to it. They were like, we in Latvia, we like waited for that day. We cheered for that. It wasn't like we were like arms around our back and we were like, okay, America says that we need to join NATO. It was never the case.
Yeah.
We made so many changes and like increased our military budget and all that for a simple, and even now we're like living there and there's a like clear fear that this might happen, that you will need to make that decision. As you were growing up, you were told that, listen, at some point, maybe one day you will have to make this decision. And that when the war started, that was definitely the case, where you're like, okay, this is happening in my lifetime, which I never thought that would be the case.
Yeah, I mean, war is just like one of those things that I hope we're not having wars in space hundreds of years from now. I've got friends in Korea who have to like basically put their entire life on hold for 2 years and serve in the military just because North Korea, just a brutal dictator who doesn't care about anybody but himself, just like Putin, basically. He has like 50,000 people that are like dedicated to basically keeping him alive, keeping him from getting assassinated, keeping him from losing power, because he's just like this crazy megalomaniacal, again, I'm not a psychologist, but he seems like an incredibly greedy, selfish person who just wants more, even if it means taking from people who need it much worse than he does, and same thing with like North Korea. And what's the result? Like the U.S. has to spend this huge amount of money on military to keep people like Putin from, pulling stunts, right? And those are not the only countries that are like this, but those are two very obvious examples of like just the fact that those people exist in the world and that they're so belligerent forces everybody else, all the other kind people, have to like keep their guard up. And they have to, adapt to life. Like if you're in South Korea, you just have to accept that if you're in Seoul, there's a small likelihood that today's going to be the day that they fire all the missiles and completely level the city and kill everybody in it. Because they do have those missiles and they are pointed at Seoul.
Yeah, it's pretty scary when I was listening that essentially that whatever calculations they did, as far as like even in the best case scenario, there's millions of just like people dying simply when the war broke, even without the nuclear, and as far as the North Korea and South Korea. And that just to me is like mind-boggling, that the fact that, that's the case. So, we're that this is one of those topics where it was just definitely like, it's like there were a few days when it was like super hard even to sit down and do anything, you're just like, you were totally like shocked and everything about the whole situation.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you don't mind me asking, like, we could talk about this for a long time, and obviously it's affecting you and your wife and her family. You've always it's always just been there. And like Americans, we take for granted we got this giant Pacific Ocean on one side, we got this giant Atlantic Ocean on this side. The worst thing that ever happened to us was Pearl Harbor or 9/11, which are just like drop in the bucket. Like, no disrespect or like, I'm not trying to dismiss all the vets out there or all the people who suffered, but like that is like such a small loss of life compared to, what happened in France during World War II, or obviously what happened to the entire Jewish diaspora during World War II, or what happened to, Russia sent soldiers often without like, proper gear. Like they just basically, that's how, that war was won, was Russia just sacrificed millions of their citizens. Their young men went and died and kind of brute forced the war, right? And if you grew up in Russia during that period, so again, I don't want you to think I'm like anti-Russia or anything. I'm very much anti-Putin, but I realize that the people who are suffering also include many Russians over there, and people who live in the former Soviet bloc, who are basically been, under the specter. So again, I hope nobody in the audience takes issue with me talking about these things. I'm just like profoundly anti-war, but at the same time, I realize that you have to have NATO. You have to have a defense mechanism. Yeah, everybody has to have nukes because Russia has nukes and China has nukes, right? The U.S. can't just decommission all their nukes because then we don't have, like, this is just how things work, unfortunately. And it's sad that this is an equilibrium.
That's
well, what is the like plan with your wife's family? Because you said you want to move back to Europe and be close to your family. What would that look like with the current situation in Ukraine?
Well, so we would be going back to Latvia simply because we just have everything is more set up there.
Yeah.
Like quite a few friends that we had in Chicago are actually living there.
Oh.
So there was Chicago is actually one of the biggest Latvian diasporas in the United States. Again, it's tiny number, but compared to like for us, it's like a big deal. Yeah, for example, like the Polish diaspora in Chicago is just massive. Essentially, you can go there as a Polish, never learn language, and you'll do very good actually. You know, there's situations where you don't like you can do everything, whether that's buying a car, apartment, finding a job, or whatever. As long as you speak Polish, you're good to go.
Yeah.
Latvians not so much, so it's a smaller diaspora, but still, it's pretty huge for United States. And essentially, quite a few of our friends who we spend time together in Chicago, they live in Latvia right now. They live in this awesome city called Sigulda, and so that's one of the things that we have been thinking about, like essentially just moving back there and see where it goes. And then her family can just basically visit us as much as they can, because coming to United States is as far as the trip, it's not something you want to do on like let's say yearly basis.
Yeah.
In my opinion,
It's a big trip, and also like immigration is not trivial. I'm not sure. Would your wife's family be able to come to the U.S. readily, or how hard is it for them to visit?
No, I think as far as we checked it, it would be pretty long process.
Yeah.
So I think it's easy, like if let's say to come here temporarily for like 3 months or whatever. But other than that, no, it's you need to jump through like big amount of hoops in order to accomplish that. And so the plan is essentially Latvia and to kind of go from there.
Yeah. And so one of the great things is that you can work remotely, and that you could probably continue to create courses from Latvia. So is that the game plan then over the next 20 years? Like, are you planning to keep a presence in the U.S., like get a house in Florida and then just travel back and forth, or what are you planning to do?
Most likely, no. I don't think we're going to be keeping the house over here. Again, things might change. This is just, this is initially where we stand right now. But effectively, I think I mentioned you before that, like, it's one of those things where me and my wife, we have so accustomed to moving from place to place. I think in Chicago, we moved for like 9 places while we were there. And then, going to California, we moved from Sacramento, then we were in LA, and now we moved here to Florida. And it's one of those things where at this point, we're so accustomed to moving that when I say that, yeah, we're going to move, it doesn't mean that we're going to stay there forever. It's going to be most likely one of those things where we're going to go there, we'll live there for a little bit, and then we're like, okay, now it's time to go somewhere else. It's just one of those things that's like a bug where the moment we get comfortable with the place, we're like, okay, it's time for a new challenge, and we'll go from there. As far as teaching, yeah, definitely that's something that I'm super stoked about and really enjoy doing and everything. And just especially the part of like preparing that code, like coming up with those examples and all that. So that's been, I'm super excited about that.
Well, John, I am super grateful that you didn't just stay in construction, and that you branched out, learned new skills, went back to school, that you decided to start recording videos about the things you were learning, that you had that teaching bug that bit you, so to speak, and that you've shared so much wisdom, so much insight over the past 7 years. May this just be the very beginning of a long career of teaching for you. And I just want to thank you again for sharing so much of your wisdom, your developer insights on the freeCodeCamp community YouTube channel. I want to thank you again for just being a chill human being who makes his courses like very reasonably priced and makes a huge chunk of those courses freely available to the developer community. And it sounds like your kids are very lucky to have you as a dad. And I knew kind of like going into this, I'm like, this guy is going to be like the chillest, like coolest dad type dude that just gets things done. And you're incredibly modest and incredibly down to earth. And it's just been absolute joy. Like time just flew. I completely lost track of how long we've been talking. We've talked for nearly 2 hours.
Yeah. Like we discussed all the topics.
Yeah.
That was really nice.
Well, I'm super excited to hopefully meet you in person at a conference, or if I ever make it out to Europe or something. If you're ever in Texas, hit me up. We'll go grab some barbecue.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Well, everybody, I've added lots of links to John and his YouTube channel and his work. I hope you all enjoy learning from him over the coming years and learning a lot about TypeScript, Next.js, like all the new JavaScript stuff as it comes out. You can be confident that John will most likely have a course about it before too long. Yeah, I hope you have a fantastic day, and thanks again.
Thank you. Happy coding.
Yeah, until next week, everybody, happy coding.